Well, throughout the coronavirus pandemic, first responders have dealt with more calls for domestic violence and also suicides. IMPD's mental health units address these challenges, and nearly $1 million of your tax money funds it.
But after one Indiana man's suicide, a local family says IMPD's crisis response is deadly.
If we hadn't called the police and just handled everything on our own and the same outcome, the police would have showed up and said, guys, this is why you should have called the police. This wouldn't have happened. But we did call them.
Those calls to 911 sadly did not save a Hoosier's life.
Fox 59's Beairshelle Edmé investigating why IMPD's mental health unit never responded and how prepared our officers are to help when you may be at your lowest point. Watch.
He's not giving the baby back. If he has to give the baby back, he'll put a bullet in his head.
A former Muncie police officer and Delaware County Reserve deputy immediately made this call to 911 when his brother, Jacob Kubelnik, threatened to kill himself. Jacob had just had a fight with his girlfriend, Vanessa. With a gun under his seat, he drove off with their newborn.
Seconds, minutes are just ticking by that action could be taken.
Eventually, Jacob returned with the baby unharmed. IMPD officers were waiting when he arrived.
You could tell like something was gonna happen because even the officer said like, you know, he's gonna do something stupid.
At least 4 people over 2 hours separately called 911 to get Jacob help during his mental health crisis.
Marion County, please.
This call was made shortly after officers left.
Come on, I need an ambulance right here. I just called the cops, man. Oh my God. Yes, he's shot, man.
What part of his body?
Shot himself. I don't know. I think his head.
Minutes later, IMPD officers came back to respond to Jacob's suicide. Vanessa also says what makes this worse is the responding sergeant knew Jacob made suicidal comments to her while officers were there.
He said, well, he's not threatening you, he's threatening his own life.
Vanessa tells me she left the home as the officers advised.
Do you regret that moment?
The next time she saw Jacob, he was dead.
And I feel like the officers as well could have done more, asking him questions like, do you feel suicidal? Do you feel like you want to be, you know, taken, I don't know, to get help?
And none of that happened?
No.
We looked through the police department's general orders or their basic rules. It says officers must, quote, recognize signs of mental illness, including, quote, suicidal or homicidal ideations. That same policy requires officers who see these signs request a crisis intervention team and choose one of 4 options, which could include a mental health referral or detention to a hospital.
We don't hospitalize. The officer takes the person into custody and transports him or her to the nearest emergency department, where that person is then evaluated by medical staff.
Indiana law says if an officer believes someone has a mental illness, is dangerous or gravely disabled, and in immediate need of hospitalization and treatment, the officer may detain that person. For nearly 7 months, we've investigated this case, including radio traffic.
Jacob is suicidal.
911 dispatchers did tell officers several times that Jacob was suicidal. We checked, and one of the responding officers was certified in crisis intervention.
Why?
But the Kubelnik family says that training didn't kick in.
Sorry, supervisor to my location.
We did hear officers request a supervisor, but not the MCAT unit. MCAT responds specifically to these mental health crises and does so with a licensed Eskenazi clinician.
Our program has expanded.
When we interviewed with IMPD, they could not discuss this specific case, but told us the 4 MCAT units aren't available 24/7. Still, IMPD leaders say every officer is trained on how to handle mental health crises.
Any type of run, whether someone's just experiencing an emotional reaction to a really bad situation or someone is experiencing a mental health crisis, we train our officers to slow everything down in both of those situations.
Getting phone calls from him that he was suicidal.
As the Kubelnik family listens back to their actual calls for help that day, this former officer says IMPD's training didn't save Jacob.
I called, spoon-fed them exactly what was going on, what the information they needed to know, and they chose to do absolutely nothing. And we don't have any understanding on what was more important than asking my brother if he's okay or if he's going to put a bullet in his head like he's telling everybody he's going to do. Well, they left. 10 minutes later, that's exactly what he did. He put a bullet in his head.
Again, IMPD would not discuss this specific case, but the commander told me staffing and funding is a challenge. Only 4 out of nearly 1,700 IMPD officers served on the MCAT unit when Jacob killed himself. Joshua hopes his brother's death helps change that and Indiana law. In honor of Jacob, the Kubelnik family will work to update the law from may intervene to shall intervene, holding all officers responsible to act during mental health crises. Reporting, I'm Beairshelle Edmé.